Hello, everyone. We are rolling for another episode of the JJF1 podcast, where Jonah and Jordan talk about all things related to F1. We are recording right after the Azerbaijan Grand Prix qualifying, the madness that was the Azerbaijan Grand Prix qualifying, to talk about two tracks that each of us would want to bring back on the calendar for Formula One. So, Jordan, how are you feeling? How confident are you in your picks? How was qualifying for you? What's going on?
Qualifying was very, very interesting. Jordan and I just talking about how we both woke up at 7:55 Eastern Standard Time to watch the
On a
Azerbaijan
Saturday.
on a Saturday after a week of we both work full time. After a week of working full time, that's how much we love F1, and we were treated today to a hectic Azerbaijan qualifying where turn 15 got the best of a lot of drivers. It was turn 15 versus the grid, it seemed like. And I think Ricciardo crashed elsewhere, but I believe for Giovinazzi and Stroll, it was at the same turn. And when Stroll hit, it was a shock because it was the first hit. And Giovinazzi, I was like, oh my God, crazy. And then once Ricciardo hit and the last hit, we were like, oh, let's get some, and let's end the session off properly already.
I think that only Q2 ended up actually finishing, whereas Q1 and Q3 were both stopped and not restarted due to the red flag.
Yeah, it was very exciting in terms of the lap times that the drivers were putting in. I think that needs to be further emphasized. But what's going to be talked about mostly in the media is going to be the DNFs from qualifying, let's say.
Yeah, so we had a crazy qualifying at the Baku circuit, which was first raced at in 2016. We could say that it was added to the calendar. However, there are some tracks that we want to bring back to the calendar. And Jordan, I want to hear what your first pick is for a track that you want to bring back on the calendar.
Now, I'm going to pick a track that not many people talk about. And because Formula One has not been here in a very, very long time. And now, let me preface my pick by saying Formula One has had this marketing campaign going on of We Race as One. They are a worldwide sport. They pride themselves on bringing the world together and uniting. And unfortunately, they're missing one continent off of this mission of uniting the globe, and that is Africa. And the grade A F1 track that is located in South Africa is called Kailani. And that is a track that has not been in Formula One for a good while. And I don't even know if it's even renovated enough, like if the track can now suit the modern day Formula One cars. However, just for the purpose of having a global sport, I believe all continents need to be represented in this sport. And I believe that Africa is missing, and I believe that South Africa deserves a Grand Prix weekend.
That's a very, very good pick. That's a very good pick. I don't know a lot about the track itself, but like you said, Africa is the one continent that's missing on the F1 calendar. And in the past, it's had some pretty great races. On top of that, there was almost a boycott that happened at the South African Grand Prix one time, where all the drivers rented a hotel room or rented a ballroom and all slept in the same room in South Africa because they were about to boycott the entire race. So that's a very, very good pick. Do you know a lot about the track? Because I don't.
So when I was reading about it recently, actually, because I saw another YouTube video talking about it, I was reading that it has the grade A certification. However, because the modern day Formula One cars got so big that it might not even be suitable for the modern day Formula One cars, and they might have to extend it, renovate it a bit, so that it can be even suitable for these cars, these crazy cars that we have today. So maybe with the new regulations, we could see a change. I don't see, obviously not this year with the Singapore Grand Prix being canceled, don't go them going to South Africa is very unlikely, probably a 0% chance. However, in the future years with the new regulations and the changing of the cars, maybe they'll be willing to go there. The one problem is unfortunately, we talk about this global sport, but the reason why we have so many races in the Middle East, for example, is because the sport unfortunately runs on a lot of money. And there are not a lot of financiers located in South Africa that are willing to put up the cash to fund the Grand Prix, which is a big, big issue. And that's probably the reason why it won't happen in a while. But in Jordan's world, in a perfect world, I would love to see all continents represented on the Formula One calendar. How did it stop recording?
No, the camera cut out, but you're still there.
Yeah, no, I just got a call. But yeah, so I think that it will be great to have all continents represented. But Jonah, let's hear what you have to say, because I know that you have a good eye for good racing and therefore a good eye for good tracks. So you tell me what you think.
Well, first off, we have a lot to unpack from what you just said. First off, I've had a bad luck for the circuits that I've chosen as my favorites, because apparently it's the kiss of death of them not being on the calendar. Montreal got canceled, Singapore got canceled. You know what? I'm okay with an Austin doubleheader if that ends up being the case.
That is the rumor.
That's the rumor. However, what I'd like is the Canadian and Quebec government to negotiate with Formula One again so that we could have the Canadian Grand Prix in October. That would be pretty fun. So one track, speaking of Austin is in the United States, and there have been 10 racetracks in the United States that have hosted Formula One Grand Prix. And one that I would like to see back on track is the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. Jordan, you watched the Indy 500. I did not. And you said that it was very, very boring, but that's because they go in an oval for 500 miles. The thing about the Grand Prix circuit that they used is that they did not go around in a circle for 500 miles. The circuit was actually very, very interesting, and it was made out in the infield of the oval, with the opportunity to do 2 out of the 4 bank turns. So I feel like seeing F1 cars on those bank turns. There's a lot of history with Indianapolis, where even in F1, there were 6 cars that raced at one of the races because of a tire boycott. That was it Michelin that said you can't, I think the tires have an expected tire wear of 10 laps. After 10 laps, the tires are just going to explode. So everyone that wasn't using Michelin tires just didn't do the race. And yeah, we had some absolutely great racing there otherwise. And I'd like to see it back on the calendar for that. Seeing some F1 cars on bank turns. It might happen at Zandvoort this year, but I'd like to see it at Indianapolis as well.
Yeah, Jonah, actually, very interesting that you bring up Indianapolis. And I have 2 replies to your pick. The first one is that you're talking about bank turns, but little do people know we're going to be getting a bank turn this year at Zandvoort. We're going to be going back to the Netherlands for the first time in a really long time as well. And Max Verstappen's coming home, and he's going to be coming home across the finish line right after doing a huge bank turn. And so we'll see how the Formula One cars play out on the bank turns to see, if it's a good time, if it's a good thing to watch, if it's good for the drivers, if it's good for the cars, we can consider going back to Indianapolis. The second thing I'll tell you is this. We are getting the Miami Grand Prix next year. They made a track at the Hard Rock Stadium in Miami, which actually looks like a really exciting track. My personal opinion, looks really good from what they've published so far.
It looks very, very fast.
Yeah, it does. There's 2 long straights, very flat out turns. And because we're going to America twice as of next year, and I believe they signed a multi-year deal, and they have a multi-year deal with Circuit of the Americas. Do
And
you think that?
The Miami Miami circuit was signed on for 10 years.
Yeah.
So
So that being said, do you think that there's a chance that they do go back to Indianapolis with already 2 races in the United States, a country where IndyCar and NASCAR, have a stronghold?
you know, I think there were multiple seasons where we had 3 races in the United States. Uh I it was there was back when there were some random street circuits that showed up in the US for 1 year, for 2 years. There was Detroit had a street circuit, Dallas had a street circuit. There was Long Beach at one point, Phoenix had a street circuit. Uh Las Vegas had a circuit built in the Caesar's Palace parking lot.
Yeah,
Um you know
which was
what?
a disaster.
Sorry?
Which was a disaster. I
Yeah,
don't think they. I don't think
it
they
was
went
a
back.
complete disaster. I don't understand what the idea was of building a Formula 1 circuit in a parking lot, but whatever. That happened. Um it's been done before. F1 really likes the US. I think that they're going to do it again.
Yeah, it's very interesting to see. We'll see if they do go back and if they do those 3 races in the US. They did 3 races in Italy last year, but in Italy, Formula One has a strong presence. Speaking of Italy, though, I think they should go back to Italy, and I think they should go to the Mugello circuit. That is my second pick because we had my top 3 races of last year was in Mugello for me. I think it would have been the Secure Outer Circuit,
Of course.
but that would be number 1 for me. But a very close second would have been Mugello because we were treated to a fantastic race. It was probably because it was the first time that we were ever going to that track. And the drivers with their very fast cars, didn't have a lot of experience at the track. Probably why we got such a good race. But that first turn, San Donato, I believe it's called, or I forget the name. I think that's what it's called. But that round the outside turn, after the sole long DRS zone, we were treated some great round the outside overtakes last year. Alex Albon showed what he was capable of at that race. And I think that race is fantastic. I think there's a lot of hard braking zones. There's a section where you're doing flat out and going very fast, round Arrabbiata 1, around Arrabbiata 2. And I think it's great. I think it's a fantastic track. And I really like it back on the F1 calendar, especially in a place like Italy where F1 bleeds through every Italian citizen.
Great. So I offered 3 tracks in the US and you're offering 3 tracks in Italy. So here's what I think about Mugello. I've seen highlights of MotoGP races there, and I think that it's more built for motorcycles than it's built for Formula 1. Sure, yes, Alex Albon did very well there last year, but there was also some crazy crashes, especially at the restart, where you might be saying, because the straight is so long, it might be very, very dangerous to have someone brake at the start and have 6 car pile up behind because the straight is so long that you can't tell if someone's braking in front of you. But I understand. It's a very good pick though.
So I have again 2 responses for you. The first one is regarding that long straight. Tomorrow's the Azerbaijan Grand Prix. There's a safety car on that long straight. Who's to say that sort of situation doesn't happen again? Because again, the straight is so long. There's a sharp turn right after the start-finish line. Who's to say that I think that's the longest straight in Formula One at the back of the city.
I think so, yeah.
And so who's to say that doesn't happen again at that track? And based off of that, why go? I understand Baku is a crazy circuit, fantastic circuit in its own right, but I don't think we can use the straight as an argument at that point. And my second response to you with your MotoGP comment on how you think the track is made for MotoGP, we thought for a very long time that the Algarve International Circuit in Portimao was a MotoGP track, which was what it's been used for the past X amount of years, that Formula One hasn't been there until we had a race last year where the most amount of overtakes was put on display for Formula One fans. And this year we had a great race as well. We were treated to some great, top three shuffling. And yeah, who's to say that MotoGP tracks cannot be used for F1 tracks? And we've seen an example of the Algarve International Circuit be used as an F1 track, mainly a MotoGP track, and them going back to the Algarve because it's such a good track.
Thank you for proving me absolutely wrong. I really enjoyed it. No, but that's true. I mean, I think that it'll be interesting if we end up going back to see what the second race is like, because this year's Portimao race was not as exciting as last year's Portimao race. And I hope that it's not the same with Mugello, because we like good racing. But I think that it would be great to see that circuit again, just to see if it isn't the first time that we go to the track, we get an interesting race, and then the second time we go back, drivers have seen it before. It's going to be a little bit boring.
I was going to touch on that point as well. It could be a first experience jitters type of ordeal where they had those jitters, and that's why we had such an exciting race with lots of events happening, lots of drama. But yeah, I would love to see it again. Jonah, what's the second track that you would like to see again?
I am going with probably a very unknown track to a lot of people who watch F1. So let's talk about the Canadian Grand Prix. The Canadian Grand Prix was held at 3 different circuits in its lifetime. 2 of them were in Quebec. And I'm going to talk about the second circuit where it was held in Quebec, and that is the Circuit Mont-Tremblant in Tremblant. Okay, your reaction is very, very interesting. So just a little bit of history on it. It held the Canadian Grand Prix in 1968 and 1970. On top of that, it held multiple sports car series from 2002 to 2007. It hosted Can-Am, and its current owner is Lawrence Stroll. So let's bring it home for some Canadian magic. In terms of the circuit itself, it reminds me a lot of Imola, where there's a lot of very high speed corners followed by a bunch of medium to low speed corners. And I think that that's exactly what F1 needs in a circuit, to show off the powers of the engines and the ability to turn, especially under braking, at circuits like Baku, especially, where that's become a lot, very, very important. But I think that having Mont Tremblant back on the calendar will be extremely interesting, because it hasn't been raced at in so long, and that it would be crazy to see these cars go flat out on a circuit that back when they raced in F1, it was not flat out at all. So I'd really like to see Mont Tremblant back on the calendar.
Jonah. I was not expecting that at all. And I was not expecting that so much that I actually don't really know anything of Mont Tremblant. I don't really know what the circuit even looks like, to tell you the truth, because we haven't raced there in so long, and I haven't done research. I've done, I looked at all the tracks that we don't race at that are grade A F1 circuits, but that's the one that I haven't really crossed.
I will say it's because it's not a grade A circuit anymore. So
that's probably why. Now, I don't know much about the circuit, so I can't really comment on the racing at the circuit. However, I do want to comment on this. CGV, Circuit Gilles Villeneuve, the grade A certified racing circuit in Montreal, right next to downtown, has a deal with Formula One to race there that has been extended 2 years because of the coronavirus pandemic. Now that we have, I think it's 8 plus the 2 years or 9 plus the 2 years. I forget
It's
how
until
long into the
2031.
deal we are. But we're racing in Montreal in the downtown core until 2031. What makes you believe that we can return to Circuit Mont-Tremblant, which is not only in the same country, it's in the same province, but they're also 2 hours away from each other. Joan and I both live in Montreal. We are very familiar with distances within our province next to our city. And Circuit Mont-Tremblant is around 2 hours away from downtown Montreal.
Yeah, so it's about 150 kilometers away. You know what? There's no real logic past I really like the circuit, and I think that we should have another Canadian Grand Prix. So
I'm all for it. You know, as a Canadian boy, as a Stroll supporter, I'd love to see him race at his real home circuit.
Mm-hmm.
It is his real home circuit. Yeah, I'm all for it. I just don't know much about it, and I know what I'm doing after this podcast.
watch some onboards. Actually, I went to the circuit, I think when I was 7 years old, and we saw vintage racing around the circuit, and I remember pulling up on a pull-up chair and being able to see vintage cars race around the circuit, and that's all that I remember around being around the circuit. But otherwise, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, I know what I'm going to be watching after this. Good picks.
Watch
Good
the
picks
1970.
today.
Watch the 1970 Canadian Grand Prix.
I will. I'll take your word for it, and I will go watch it. Good picks today. And yeah, I really enjoyed this one.
I kind of expected you to talk about Mugello because I know how much you like Mugello. But this is, if we get our wishes, this is going to be an absolutely crazy calendar. We're gonna have 3 races in Italy, 3 races in the US, 2 races in Canada.
And it contradicts what I said at the beginning of it being a global sport, because we're not going to be going through as many countries.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, look, we have I think it's 3 weeks from now, we have the Austrian Grand Prix and then the Styrian Grand Prix, which are both at the same circuit. So I don't understand why we can't have a Canadian Grand Prix in Montreal and a Quebec Grand Prix in Tremblant. Let's make it happen.
That sounds good. Jonah, this was good.
Yeah, so signing off. Thank you for listening. If you want to hear more, listen to the podcast, like our Facebook page, follow us on Instagram at the JJF1 podcast, and we will see you for the next episode. See ya.